I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't the kind of wrong you hear or see. It was the kind you feel under your skin, the kind that makes the air shift before your eyes even adjust to the room. The house met me with a silence that felt intentional, like it had been waiting for me, listening first, deciding what it wanted me to notice. The last line of daylight was fading across the hardwood floor, stretching my shadow farther than it had any right to go. I hadn't even taken off my coat yet. Something in the kitchen was already calling for my attention. Not loudly, not urgently, just quietly enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stir. A single lamp glowed above the counter, its light soft and dusty, as if it had been left on for someone else. The chair at the table sat crooked-angled in a way Melanie never left it. And then I saw the wine glass near the sink. A thin halo of moisture clung to the rim, catching the lamplight, telling me it had been used minutes ago, too recently, too quietly. For a second, the whole house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. But I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the truth settle into the room inch by inch, the way a man does when he knows the life he walked into might not be the same one he walked out of. Then I set my keys down. The glass on the counter trembled when my keys touched it. A soft ring rose in the kitchen, sharper than it should have been. The glass on the counter trembled when my keys touched it. A soft ring rose in the kitchen, sharper than it should have been. The house had grown used to its own silence these past months, but that evening the silence felt different, as if it were paying attention. The furnace clicked behind the walls in a steady rhythm. I stood still for a moment, letting the sound settle, before I walked farther in. Melanie sat at the kitchen table with her back half turned toward me. The warm lamp above her cast a soft circle of light on her shoulders. She held her hands together, as if keeping them from shaking. When her phone vibrated, it moved slightly across the wooden surface. She slid it toward her with a motion that was too fast for someone pretending everything was normal. I hung my coat in the hallway and noticed my hand trembled just a little. I pressed my palm against my thigh until the shaking stopped. Then I opened my laptop. The screen lit up the counter with a pale glow. At the top of my inbox sat a message marked a few minutes ago. Reset password request for crypto wallet. I blinked once, slow and careful. I had never opened any wallet in my life, and almost no one had access to the recovery email connected to my accounts. Very few people. Only Melanie. I did not click the email. I let it sit there like an unopened envelope on a table between two people who no longer spoke the same language. Behind me, I heard her footsteps. The new perfume she had been wearing drifted into the room and settled around me in a thin, invisible cloud. A scent I did not recognize. Clean, subtle, expensive. She said she was getting some water. Her voice was quiet, and the words barely filled the space between us. I asked if she was all right. She nodded without meeting my eyes. The nod was small, and practiced a gesture meant to close a door rather than open one. She stayed in the kitchen for a moment, adjusting the sleeves of her sweater, running her fingers along the rim of her glass, as if waiting for me to say something. I did not. I only watched. Years in IT taught me that observing is often more valuable than questioning. People reveal themselves when you give them enough quiet. She walked out of the kitchen, and the room felt colder once she left. I looked back at the laptop. The cursor blinked in the corner of the screen. I moved the touchpad slightly, but did not open anything. Instead, I glanced at the desktop and noticed a small change. A system log file showed a recent activity timestamp I did not recognize. It was subtle, but not subtle enough to escape my eye. Something had been accessed earlier from a device I did not remember approving. It made the silence in the room drop a little heavier on my shoulders. I closed the laptop halfway and stepped into the living room. The floorboards creaked as they always did near the hallway, but that evening, the sound felt slower, like the house was exhaling. Melanie sat on the couch, her knees together, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles lightened. She watched a muted television screen, though it showed nothing but a paused menu. "Long day," she said. The words fell flat, almost as if she was repeating a line she had rehearsed. Her eyes stayed on the screen. She did not cross her legs the way she usually did. She did not brush her hair back behind her ear. She kept still, almost careful. I sat in the armchair across from her. The air between us stretched long and thin. I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock. I could hear the wind tapping against the window once, small sounds, ordinary sounds, yet they felt like they belonged to a different life. She stood up after a minute and said she was going to bed. Her voice was soft and distant. She walked down the hallway without turning back, without asking if I would join her, without leaving a trace of warmth in her steps. I watched her disappear into the shadows near the bedroom door. The door did not close fully. It stayed slightly ajar, as if undecided whether to shut me out or let me in. I remained in the living room, letting the quiet settle, until I could feel it pressing against my chest. I looked toward the bookshelf where a framed photo of our family stood. A thin layer of dust clung to the edge of the frame, catching the dim light in a soft, muted line. I had not noticed the dust before. It seemed strange to notice it now. The house around me felt familiar, but wrong. Like walking into a room you have known for years, only to find the furniture has been moved half an inch. Not enough to shock you. Just enough for your body to sense it before your mind understands it. I returned to the kitchen and opened the laptop again. The email with the reset request waited at the top of the screen. I stared at it without touching the keyboard. My reflection looked back at me from the dark window beside the counter. Only mine, not hers. I lowered the lid of the laptop and turned off the kitchen light. A faint hum from the refrigerator filled the darkness. The furnace clicked once more, louder than before. A small, cold draft slipped across the floor and brushed against my ankles. I walked toward the hallway, my steps slow and quiet. When I passed the bedroom door, I paused. Her breathing inside was steady and controlled. Too controlled. I tightened my grip on the doorframe, then let it go gently. I stepped back into the living room and sank into the armchair. The house felt still, almost suspended. I listened to the darkness, waiting for something I could not yet name. Something had shifted. I could feel it deep and quiet, a tremor beneath the surface of an ordinary night. Something had already begun. The morning light pushed quietly through the blinds, a thin gray wash that softened every edge in the room. I opened my eyes before the alarm could do it for me. The house felt suspended, like it was waiting for something neither of us wanted to name. Melanie lay beside me still and controlled her breathing steady in a way that sounded more like discipline than rest. The alarm began to buzz. She reached for her phone with a quickness that did not match the hour. The cool glow of the screen lit her face as she turned slightly away. Her thumb moved with intent. Then she slipped from the bed and crossed the room without a word. I watched her open the closet, watched the way she selected her clothes without pause or hesitation, watched the stiffness in her shoulders that had not been there years ago. She said she needed to leave early. The schedule at the dental office had changed. A new patient, an unexpected adjustment. Her voice was polite and distant, shaped like a sentence meant to inform rather than share. I nodded as she buttoned her blouse. The small click of each button felt louder than the last. She brushed past me to grab her purse and keys. The perfume she wore, the unfamiliar one that had begun appearing in our home, drifted through the doorway ahead of her. She gave a quick air kiss near my cheek and walked out. The front door shut with a controlled firmness that echoed faintly down the hall. I stood alone in the bedroom with the faded lines of morning stretching across the carpet. The silence pressed in again, a disciplined quiet, the kind that hides more than it reveals. At the college, the day moved in its usual rhythm. Students pacing between buildings, faculty meetings, filling rooms with recycled air laptops, complaining about updates and aging batteries. I handled ticket after ticket, my hands moving through familiar motions, while my mind returned to the new rhythm at home. Between tasks, I checked our banking account on my office screen. The numbers appeared as they always did, but something small caught my eye. A wine bar in Columbus. Another restaurant? A jewelry boutique I had never seen on our statements. The charges were not large, but they carried a tone. The tone of someone carving out a separate life, inch by inch. Then, I saw the VPN subscription. Subtle, recurring, easily overlooked. The type of charge most people never question. I leaned back in my chair and let the hum of the office fade around me. Each detail alone was nothing. Together, they began to whisper. I returned home after sunset. Emily sat at the dining table with her books spread around her. The lamplight shone on her hair, and she glanced up with a smile that felt like a small anchor in a drifting space. She asked how my day had been, and I told her it was fine. Simple words, steady enough. She mentioned almost casually that Mom had been on the phone late the night before. Talked to someone named Travis. Told him not to let you know. She said it while scribbling in her notebook as if the detail belonged to the margin and not the center of the page. My breath caught for just a second, then settled again. I told her thank you for helping with dinner. I kept my voice calm. She slipped her earbuds back in and bent over her notes. Watching her concentrate made the room feel warmer, if only briefly. Later that night, when the house had settled and the lights had dimmed into a soft quiet, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The pale glow stretched across the counter. I went deeper into the email logs, following threads most people would never notice. Small transfers. 600. 900. 1,200. Always under thresholds that would trigger alerts. Always spaced far enough apart to look routine. Always landing in the same destination. An e-wallet reference I had never seen. I sat back and let the numbers settle in my mind. The refrigerator hummed. A draft moved across the floor. The house felt like a witness holding its breath. The next morning, Melanie left early again. Her movements were precise, her silence practiced. She held her phone close to her body as she checked her messages screen, angled away. I stood in the kitchen watching the steam rise from my mug. After she left, I checked the calendar she kept pinned on the fridge. Several work notes had been erased and rewritten in handwriting that looked rushed. The details did not match her usual routine. Spots that used to reflect stability now reflected something shifting beneath the surface. Over the next days, the pattern strengthened. She returned late more often, sometimes with her hair slightly out of place, sometimes with a calmness that felt unnatural. A quiet, too careful. Urgent appointment. Busy day. Last-minute schedule change. Her explanations drifted through the house like thin curtains never quite touching the floor. I did not question her. I offered no confrontation. I simply observed. People reveal themselves when they believe no one is watching closely. And I had learned to watch closely. At dinner one evening, the three of us sat together. The sounds were small. Forks against plates. The faint clink of a glass. Emily talked about her upcoming exam. Melanie said she needed sleep. Her voice was low, her eyes fixed on her plate. I studied the way she held her fork, the way she kept her phone at a precise distance from her hand screen down, as if proximity alone could shield its secrets, the way she kept glancing at it, even when it made no sound. After dinner, she left her dishes in the sink and walked down the hallway. The overhead light cast her shadow long across the floor. She paused at the bedroom door, then stepped inside and closed it quietly. Emily disappeared into her room. The house exhaled into stillness. I stood at the sink with my hands under the warm water, staring at the shadows on the counter. The water ran over my fingers, but my mind stayed focused on the quiet changes gathering around us. When I entered the bedroom later, Melanie was already asleep or pretending to be. She faced the wall. Her breathing was steady. The distance between us felt measured in more than inches. I lay down slowly, letting the mattress shift under my weight. The faint glow from the streetlights slipped through the blinds and traced soft patterns across the ceiling. Patterns that reminded me of the ones forming beneath our life. I understood then that what I had been sensing was no fluctuation of mood. It was movement, a direction, a slow but deliberate shift away from the life we shared. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. Somewhere between the heartbeat of the house and the hum outside, I felt the truth aligning steady and inevitable. Whatever this was, it had its own momentum now, and it was not turning back. The house settled into its usual quiet after midnight. A faint hum from the refrigerator reached the hallway. I sat alone at the kitchen table with the laptop open in front of me. The blue light washed over my hands and crept up my arms, turning the room into something colder than it had been a moment before. That light made the stainless steel sink look like mid glass, and the shadows in the corner look deeper than they should. I typed his name slowly. Travis Dalton. The letters appeared clean on the search bar. I pressed enter and waited. His face came up on the screen almost immediately. Dark hair, confident smile, the kind of man who had spent years making other people feel safe enough to hand him their savings. Below the photo was a string of articles about investigations and financial misconduct. A line referenced a suspended license. Another mentioned crypto schemes and disputes with former clients. The words were written in the measured tone reporters use when the truth is already heavy enough. I scrolled until his eyes met mine again from a second article. Something in his expression struck me. Not guilt, not pride. Something colder. Calculation. I felt a small hollow open behind my ribs like someone pulling air from a room through an invisible vent. I closed the tab and leaned back, letting the blue screen fade from my eyes. My phone lay beside the laptop. The glass reflected the ceiling light in a thin streak. I opened the location sharing and watched the map expand. 3 visits to the same cafe showed up in the recent history. Same time frame. Same window of the day. I sat quietly and let my thumb hover over the timeline. Her pattern moved across the map with a strange grace. Predictable in its repetition. Hidden in its intention. The next day, I left the office during lunch. The sky was a muted pale color, neither bright nor dark. The kind that makes buildings look washed out. I parked a block from the cafe and walked the rest of the way. The door chimed softly when I stepped inside. Warm coffee air wrapped itself around me. The lights inside were low and inviting a stark contrast to the cold blue glow I had stared at the night before. I ordered a coffee and chose a seat near the back. 2 tables between me and the window. Enough space to disappear into the background. I set my phone on the table face down and folded my hands loosely. The quiet hum of conversations created a soft wall around me. She came in 10 minutes later. When the door opened, a gust of cold air entered behind her. The perfume she had been wearing lingered in the space around her as she walked to the counter. Her movements were careful, steady, but there was a tension in her shoulders that only someone who knew her well could see. I lowered my gaze slightly without looking away. She waited for her order, scanning the cafe the way she always scanned new places. Then she stepped aside and checked her phone. That was when he walked in. Travis. He greeted her with a nod. Not intimate, not warm. Just the kind of gesture shared by two people who had already made a decision long before stepping into the same room. They sat near the window. A laptop opened between them. The screen cast a faint blue wash across their faces. I watched numbers and lines flicker on the display. Charts rising and falling. Columns that meant profit to some people and danger to others. She leaned forward, pointing to something on the screen. He adjusted the view, tapped, scrolled, explained. Their exchange was quiet and precise. There was no romance in the air, no touch, no lingering look. Only the weight of shared information and the hush of plans being arranged piece by piece. A different intimacy. One built on secrets rather than affection. At one point, her eyes drifted around the room. For a moment, they passed close to where I sat. My breath tightened, held itself still. She did not see me. She looked through me the way someone looks through strangers. Then she turned back to him and nodded at something on the screen. I left before they finished. The door closed behind me with a soft thud. The street outside felt colder than it had when I arrived. I walked to my car and sat still for a moment, letting the view of the cafe settle in my mind. The engine started with a low hum. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, each breath measured. That evening after dinner, I went into the small office next to the living room. The lamp on the desk cast a warm circle on the wood surface. I opened my retirement account, the one I rarely checked, because it had always felt stable. The page loaded slowly. When the numbers finally appeared, I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. Several withdrawals, all within the past months. Not large enough individually to raise alarms, but large enough together to carve a deep cut. The sequence added up to nearly 150,000. The kind of loss that sits heavy in your chest long before your mind registers the exact figure. I stared at the numbers. They held no emotion, only truth. I scrolled through device history. Her phone, the home laptop. Logs that confirmed access without showing motive. My hands moved on their own. Screenshots, saved files, timestamps preserved in a separate folder on an external drive. The quiet discipline of someone gathering facts, because emotion has become too dangerous to rely on. A piece of paper slid from the edge of the desk when I shifted my arm. It was an old receipt from a small repair shop where we once had a broken lamp fixed. The ink had faded. I held it between my fingers. The memory of that day flickered across my mind. Her laugh when the lamp fell apart in her hands. The look she gave me when we tried to fix it together. For a brief second, the echo of that moment pressed against the coldness in the room. Then it faded. And the coldness stayed. I placed the receipt back on the desk. The chair creaked when I leaned back. The laptop washed the room in its familiar blue tone. Files open. Evidence lined in order. No arguments, no assumptions. Just facts. The front door opened softly. Melanie stepped inside. Her footsteps slowing near the hallway, She walked to the office doorway and leaned her shoulder against the frame. The light from the desk brushed the edge of her face. "Long day," she said. Her voice was controlled, gentle, almost careful. She watched me for a second, then looked away. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway, as if something there required her attention more than I did. I nodded. My breath stayed even. My hands rested quietly on my lap. She pushed away from the frame and walked down the hall. The bedroom door closed with a quiet thump. I shut the laptop. The afterimage of the blue screen hovered behind my eyes. The room dimmed as the light faded. I sat there a moment longer, listening to the house breathe around me. The silence pressed forward again, steady and patient. Somewhere in that silence, something shifted. A thin current of cold air slid across my skin. I looked toward the hallway. Her shadow stretched faintly along the floor, then vanished as the light in the bedroom went out. The house returned to its quiet, and I stayed in the darkened office, letting the last traces of blue dissolve into the air. The door to the office clicked shut behind me, leaving the hallway dim and still. A thin line of light leaked from under the bedroom door, then disappeared when the wind nudged it closed. I slipped on my jacket, feeling the stiffness in the fabric, as if it had absorbed the weight of the night along with me. The house seemed to exhale as I stepped outside, the air colder than I expected for that early hour. The drive into Columbus passed under a sky that had not made up its mind between morning and dusk. A pale band of light stretched across the horizon, painting the tops of buildings in muted gold and shadow. The parking lot near Sam Keaton's office was mostly empty. My steps echoed softly as I approached the glass door. My reflection looked worn at the edges, drawn thin by silence and blue screens, but still standing. Sam greeted me with a steady lift of his hand. He had always had that quiet look of a man who saw more than he said. His office was warm, with a soft glow from the desk lamp, its light catching on the metal clip of a thick folder positioned neatly to one side. He gestured for me to sit. When I placed the flash drive on the table, he paused for a moment before reaching for it, giving me a short glance that carried more concern than his words ever would. He opened the files one by one. The monitor cast a pale wash across his face as he leaned forward. His expression tightened with each new page. He scrolled through account logs, crypto transfers, device histories, and signatures that did not belong to me. The lines on his forehead deepened as he read. When he reached the sequence of withdrawals, he let out a slow, controlled breath. "Alex, this is serious," he said quietly. "Not marital trouble, something heavier." I watched his eyes move across the evidence. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Years of legal instinct turning each detail into a mapped possibility. He turned the screen slightly toward me and tapped the recovery email header. The old shared account Melanie and I had never closed. The same account tied to the crypto wallet. The same one she believed she had control over. "This is leverage," he said. "She does not know you still have access." The room settled into a deeper silence. Somewhere in the hallway, a printer hummed briefly, then stopped. Sam kept his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, as he walked me through everything with slow, calm precision. "Extract every log before anything shifts. Back up your data twice. Keep your devices secure. Notify the bank quietly so they document your position without escalating it." He spoke in measured rhythms, the voice of someone used to guiding people through storms with no clear sky in sight. "You are not confronting her," he said. "You are protecting yourself." Then he opened the last document. A loan contract tied to the house, my name printed in bold, my signature reproduced at the bottom. At first glance, it looked perfect, familiar, authentic. Then my eyes caught the small hesitations where a real hand would never slow. My breath held itself still. There was a faint ringing in my ears. Sam leaned in and lowered his voice. "This is forgery." I did not speak. The chair under me felt colder than the room. I stared at the strokes of the signature, each curve betraying the memory of the day she scanned it years ago for convenience. A small act, then. A weapon now. Sam placed a hand briefly on the folder. Not a gesture of comfort. More like an anchor. I asked if he believed the situation could still be contained. His answer was simple and steady. "Yes, if you stay quiet and follow the plan." When I left the office, the sun had risen a little more, touching the tops of the buildings with a brightness that felt out of place. A delivery truck rumbled past, leaving a faint scent of diesel in the air. People walked on the sidewalks, unaware of the legal fault line widening under my life. I unlocked the car and sat inside with both hands resting on the wheel for a long moment before starting the engine. The garage at home welcomed me with flickering lights and the faint metallic smell of cold concrete. I stayed in the car until the engine ticked into silence, then stepped out and stood in the stillness. Oil stains spread across the floor like dark maps. A single leaf drifted under the door with the breeze. I picked it up and set it on the workbench without thinking. Inside the house, the quiet was intact, heavy but familiar. I walked to the office and closed the door slowly. The lamp cast a warm pool of light across the desk. The laptop added its colder glow, turning the room into a mix of two temperatures that never fully blended. I opened the recovery email. A long stream of messages filled the inbox. Password resets, device verifications, access confirmations, codes sent at hours when I had been asleep. Each message was a breadcrumb in a path she thought no one else would see. My hands moved with deliberate calm. I backed up every email, every log, every connection. Then I changed the passwords one after the other. Personal accounts, joint accounts, secondary accounts, even the small ones I barely remembered creating, a subtle tightening of the perimeter around my life. When I finished, the room felt quieter. The glow of the laptop reflected on the framed family photo sitting at the corner of the desk. The reflection landed right across my own face in the image, muting it. For a moment, I looked at that framed version of myself, standing beside a woman I no longer understood. Then I shifted the frame slightly to the side. I turned back to the laptop. The crypto wallet login sat open on the screen. The cursor blinked in the empty password field like a faint pulse in the dark. The air in the office felt heavier, carrying a tension that had no sound but every weight. Somewhere down the hallway, a floorboard creaked softly, a small vibration through the wood. Then nothing. I placed my hand on the mouse. The plastic felt cool under my palm. I leaned forward slowly, breath-steady eyes fixed on the entry field. The room held still around me as I prepared to step into the one place she never thought I would reach. The house felt still when I woke, the kind of stillness that settles after a long night of thinking. I walked down the hallway with slow steps, letting the light from the living room seep around me like a thin veil. Melanie's door was cracked an inch. A faint glow trembled on the floor, the pale pulse of a phone screen. It flickered once, then died. I kept walking without stopping. Some truths do not need witnesses. Outside, the morning air carried the smell of dry leaves. I turned down the street and let my feet choose the direction. Maple branches arched overhead, leaves drifting around me in quiet spirals. A man watered his lawn. 2 kids chased each other on their bikes. A golden retriever barked and nosed a fence. The world went on, as if nothing in it had shifted, yet I felt the weight of something invisible pressing against my chest. It was not grief exactly, more like the slow recognition that a story you trusted had begun to rewrite itself. I passed the corner where Melanie and I once stopped for ice cream on late summer nights. I remembered her laughter, then the way she rested her head on my shoulder during long drives, the way she said she wanted a life that felt steady. Somewhere along the way, the river of our marriage changed its course. It did not happen in a day. It bent slowly, quietly, until one morning you woke and realized the banks had moved. I sat on a bench near a small playground, watching wind rustle the loose chain of a swing. I thought about what Sam had shown me, each document marked, each entry, circled each number, pointing toward choices made long before I noticed the shift. I tried to see where I had been when those choices were born. Maybe at work, buried in code and maintenance schedules. Maybe on the couch late at night, tired and silent. Maybe somewhere inside myself convinced routine was the same as connection. But even as those thoughts surfaced, I felt a certain line inside me settle. Her decisions were not shadows cast by mine. They had their own shape, their own intent, their own hunger. When I came home, Emily was at the dining table coloring with headphones on. She looked up when I passed. Her voice was soft. "Are you all right, Dad?" I paused by the counter and nodded once. In the quiet space between us, she seemed to read everything I did not say. Men my age carry storms quietly. Children feel them anyway. I walked into the kitchen and set my keys on the counter. The metal clicked softly on the wood. Melanie's mug sat in the sink, with a faint ring of lipstick near the brim. I touched the faucet without turning it on. The mug stayed where it was. Some things were better left untouched, until the truth was fully in the open. Her footsteps moved upstairs. Slow, steady, deliberate. She passed the landing without looking down. For a moment, I saw her silhouette reflected on the glass of a picture frame. A familiar shape in a house that no longer felt familiar. The floor creaked once beneath her weight, then silence. I went to my office and closed the door halfway. The room was dim, the blinds drawn just enough for a line of light to fall across the desk. Dust drifted in that line like suspended snow. I sat down, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. The folder named Truth waited on the screen. Everything I needed was inside each piece, collected with the same calm I used in my work, the same patience that had guided me through years of solving other people's problems behind glowing monitors. My hand hovered for a moment before clicking. Not out of fear, more like respect for the finality of what I was about to see. Betrayal changes shape once you gather all its edges. It stops being emotional. It becomes factual, a series of decisions that lead you to a single, unavoidable point. I opened the folder and felt a quiet shift inside me, the kind of shift that comes when you finally turn toward the truth instead of circling it. From the hallway came the soft thud of a door closing. No voice followed. No question, no greeting, no explanation. Just the clean, simple sound of separation. I let it fade into the walls. The room felt colder as the afternoon light dimmed. My eyes stayed on the screen, on the files arranged in order, waiting. Outside, a car engine rumbled and faded down the street. Wind brushed the window once, a low sigh against the glass. I breathed in slowly and let the air settle in my chest. Then I reached for the mouse again, steady this time, ready to open the next piece of the story. The screen glowed softly in the dimming room, while the house behind me fell into a deeper silence, holding its breath as I prepared to step into what waited. The fan inside the laptop started first a soft, rising hum that cut through the quiet of the room. The screen woke into its familiar blue and white. I sat in the office chair with my hands resting on the edge of the desk, feeling the slight tremor in my fingers steady as I let them settle. I typed the email address, then the password. The keys clicked in a slow, measured rhythm. The field cleared and shifted. A second step appeared. A prompt for a code. On the other tab, the recovery inbox refreshed itself with a faint blink. A new message floated to the top, carrying numbers in the subject line. The old shared address, still obedient, still listening. I opened the message, read the code. Once closed my eyes long enough to fix it in memory, then entered it into the waiting box. My hand hesitated for half a breath over the touchpad. Then I pressed submit. The page loaded in layers, logo, menu, then the dashboard. Charts and balances under the same cool design that had sold millions of people on the idea of digital promise. At the top, a single number stared back at me. Almost nothing. Below it, in smaller text, lived the story. Transfers out in a long, thin column, lines of entries marching down the page, tiny amounts moving regularly, steady as a metronome. Money leaving accounts that had my name on them. Moving through this bright chamber and onward to places the interface suggested, but did not fully reveal. It was not chaos, it was structure, calculated and patient. I scrolled farther and saw the references. The same source pools Sam had pointed to in my retirement and savings accounts. Portions of a future taken in pieces small enough to hide in routine. The hurt pressed once against my chest, then faded back to something quieter. Whatever sharp edge this might have carried had dulled over the days of preparation. This was no longer discovery. It was confirmation. There was an export option in the corner, a simple link that promised control. I clicked it. A dialogue opened, then a progress bar crawled across. When it finished, I saved the file into the Truth folder, saved another copy onto the external drive. The drive answered with a small click, as if acknowledging its new burden. In the kitchen, the printer woke with a soft, mechanical cough. I watched sheet after sheet slide out under the dim light. Transaction histories, summaries, the trail of decisions laid out in black ink on white paper. I stacked them carefully, aligning the edges with the flat of my hand. The pile grew until the table looked more like a desk in an accountant's office than the place where our family had once passed around bowls and plates. Afternoon pushed its way through the windows, turning the counters a pale gold. The house was empty except for me and the hum of appliances. For a moment, I imagined a different version of this scene. Papers on the table. Two people side by side working their way through a problem together. The thought passed quickly. Reality sat where I had placed it. The clock in the hallway ticked its way toward late day. The sound of the garage door finally broke the stillness. The motor groaned into motion, then eased to a stop. A car door closed. The front door opened. Keys landed in the bowl by the wall with the same familiar sound they had made for 20 years. routine wrapping itself around a moment that was anything but routine. Melanie stepped into the kitchen, her face still flushed from the outside air. She started to say something about traffic. Then her eyes found the table. The words died on her lips. Her steps slowed. Her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. She took in the documents one by one. Statements, logs, the copy of the contract with my signature reproduced at the bottom. I watched her pupils move, watched her try to read without giving away that she was reading. Her throat worked once as she swallowed. "What is all this?" she asked. But the question sounded thin, already knowing the answer. I did not speak. I let her come closer. She set her purse down with a dull sound on the chair and leaned over the papers. Her fingers hovered just above the pages. She traced the air above the numbers like someone reading Braille, without permission to touch. "You went into the account," she said. The words were quiet, but there was a faint edge beneath them. "I logged into my email," I replied. The code was sent there. The words carried no anger, just fact. She gave a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. For a moment, something like defiance flickered in her eyes. "You do not know what you are looking at," she said. "It is more complicated than you think." I stepped a little closer enough to see the fine lines around her mouth I had not noticed grow deeper over the past months. "I know my signature," I said. "I know my accounts. I know my money is gone." She drew herself up slightly as if preparing for a familiar argument. Then she seemed to remember there was no script for this one. The fight went out of her shoulders faster than it had risen. Her hand brushed the corner of the contract, and she flinched as though the paper had burned her. "You do not understand," she whispered, the sound barely crossing the space between us. "I understand enough," I answered. There was a small pause after that, the kind that closes doors. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound startled both of us more than it should have. I looked at the screen, Sam's name. I turned away from the table and answered. His voice came through steady, carrying the same disciplined calm as his office. "The bank has flagged and begun to freeze outward flows. Notices have gone to the appropriate unit at the state level. They will open a review. You stay quiet. You say only what they ask. Document everything." His words were simple, focused. The machinery was moving now. No one could call it back. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. For a moment, my hand stayed there, pressing against the fabric, feeling the faint tremor I had kept under control since the login screen appeared. I flexed my fingers once, then let my arm fall to my side. When I turned back, Melanie was sitting in the chair closest to the pile of papers. Her shoulders had folded inward. She stared at the printout of the wallet history with a hollow expression, as if the lines and figures were written in a language that had suddenly turned on her. "This was not how it was supposed to go," she said, voice flat and without any trace of the certainty she once carried. I watched her stare at the pages, watched her lips press together, then part, as if she wanted to form another excuse, another half-truth. None came. What poured out instead was a question thin and raw. "Are you going to destroy me?" The room went very quiet after that. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. A faint draft moved the edge of a paper. My wedding ring felt heavier on my finger than it had that morning. "You did that yourself," I said. "I will not let it destroy me or the kids with you." The answer landed between us like another document on the table. Not shouted, not sharpened, just placed. For a moment I thought she might erupt. "Blame me, blame stress, blame the world." I saw the impulse flare in her eyes, then die. The facts on the table left little room for those old moves. Her hands began to shake. She tried to clasp them together in her lap to steady them. The trembling spread from her fingers to her forearms. It was not the quick panic of someone caught in a single lie. It was the slow realization of someone who understood that the whole structure beneath her had never been sound. She looked up at me, then really looked, as if trying to find the man she had once counted on to fix broken things quietly in the background. "You were never supposed to see this," she said. A strange kind of honesty in that line. She did not deny, she did not apologize, she confessed to assumption. I stood there by the counter, feeling the small muscles in my hand tighten around the edge of it. For a heartbeat, a sharp ache pushed through the armor I had been building. 20 years of shared days boiled down to a pile of papers and a sentence about what I was never meant to see. Our eyes met and held. There was no love in that exchange. No hatred, either. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a truth that had been growing quietly for a long time. Outside, the sky had begun to dim. The last of the afternoon light slipped through the window and stretched two shadows across the kitchen floor. Hers curved toward the table. Mine fell back toward the hallway. They touched briefly at the corner of a chair, then separated as the light shifted another inch. She dropped her gaze, first staring at her own hands, as if they belonged to someone else. I let my hand loosen from the counter. The ring on my finger caught the fading light one more time, flashed, then dulled as a cloud moved across the sun. The furnace clicked on somewhere deep in the house, and warm air began to slide softly through the vents. It made no difference to the temperature in the room. The truth was out now. It did not raise its voice. It did not slam doors. It simply sat on the table, written in numbers and signatures and quiet choices, and waited for everything around it to rearrange. The courthouse lights were still warming the hallway when I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of old paper and winter coats. A clerk passed by with a stack of files pressed to her chest, each one carrying someone's private collapse. Mine was already open on the judge's desk, waiting. The investigation had moved faster than I expected. Banks like routine and numbers, and when numbers break their rhythm, people start asking questions. One morning, Sam called to say the Financial Crimes Unit had finished their preliminary review. Evidence was clean. Timelines were intact. My signature had been lifted from an old refinance form and used without my knowledge. Every transfer was traceable. Every withdrawal carried metadata no one could scrub. Blockchain keeps its own memory. Travis left Ohio 2 nights after the inquiry began. His apartment emptied in less than an hour, the landlord said. A neighbor watched him drive off toward the interstate without turning his headlights on until the very end of the street. People like him disappear quickly, but the trail he left behind did not. Melanie received her summons the following Tuesday. I saw the envelope resting on the kitchen counter when I came home from work. She stood beside it with her hand on the edge, as if the paper might slide away if she let go. Her shoulders looked smaller, softer, almost like the woman I knew years ago before everything filled with noise. For a moment, I wondered if she would ask for help, or even just a moment of truth, but the silence stretched between us until it settled like dust. She walked upstairs without looking back. The morning of the hearing, I drove in early. I parked at the far end of the lot and sat with the engine off, watching the frost fade across the windshield. It reminded me of days when I used to wait for her outside her dental office, back when a surprise lunch felt like something 2 people could still enjoy. Memories rise like that uninvited, but they pass if you let them. I let this one go. Inside the courtroom, everything moved in precise, practiced steps. Lawyers shuffled documents. A bailiff adjusted a microphone. The judge entered without ceremony. When Melanie sat down across from me, her hands were clasped in her lap. Fingers pressed so tightly together the knuckles turned white. She did not lift her eyes. The judge spoke calmly as he reviewed the findings. Identity fraud confirmed. Unauthorized withdrawals confirmed. Forged signature confirmed. Under Ohio statute, financial misconduct eliminates the right to claim certain marital assets. The house, the retirement accounts, the remaining savings. All mine. The margin loan with its heavy interest and compound penalties assigned solely to her. She signed the final decree with a motion so small it barely counted as movement. When the hearing ended, people filed out quickly. Only the rustle of coats and the soft echo of the door hinges remained. I stayed seated for a moment longer, not to savor anything, but to let the quiet settle inside me. I did not feel victory. Victory requires an opponent. This felt more like retrieving something I had set down a long time ago and finally remembered to pick up. Emily waited outside in the hall. She stepped toward me and wrapped her arm lightly around mine. She did not say anything. She did not have to. Jacob stood a little farther back, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. We were rearranged, not broken. As we started toward the elevator, I glanced over my shoulder. Melanie stood alone near the corner where the hallway curved out of view. She held the decree in one hand, the pages dangling as if they were heavier than paper should be. For a brief second, an old memory rose again. Her laughter in a hotel room in Michigan, the way she leaned against my shoulder on a summer ferry, the small, easy things that made up the early years. They passed through me like a thin current of warm air, then faded into the cold again. Some truths settle with time. Some just stop hurting because there is no strength left in them. She looked up then, not at me, but past me toward the exit. I could not tell if she was searching for someone who would not come, or simply trying to understand how the world had moved without her. Travis had not shown up. No friends, no family. Only her shadow on the courthouse wall, stretched thin and alone. I turned back to my children and nodded. The elevator doors closed with a slow, metallic glide, sealing the moment behind us. As we descended, I felt the weight I had carried for months loosen in small, steady increments, not disappearing, but settling into a place where it no longer shaped every breath. Outside, the air was sharp with late afternoon wind. Cars rolled through the parking lot with quiet engines, their reflections sliding across the asphalt. I stood for a moment, letting the cold settle along my collar. Solitude can be a sentence. It can also be a mirror. For her, maybe both. I placed my keys in my pocket and walked toward the car with Emily at my side. No words. Just the sound of gravel under our steps and the soft rhythm of the wind moving through the bare trees overhead. The day was ending, and something inside me felt still. Not resolved, not closed, just still. When I opened the car door, the light above the dash blinked once, steady and quiet, like a breath held before the next step forward. The hallway outside the courthouse still echoed faintly in my mind, a long, quiet corridor where footsteps seemed to drift without weight. That stillness followed me into the next morning. Light crept over the living room floor in slow strokes, soft and steady, like the house itself was taking a careful breath after months of holding it in. I walked through the rooms with the ease of someone returning to familiar ground, though everything felt slightly rearranged inside me. The kitchen smelled of coffee from the timer I had set the night before. The hum of the refrigerator blended with the distant sound of a lawnmower from across the street. Nothing dramatic, nothing sharp, just the kind of ordinary rhythm that reminds a man he has outlived a storm. I poured myself a cup and let the mug warm my palms. The surface of the coffee trembled when I set it down, as if even small movements carried some leftover tension. But it passed. Everything passes eventually. Outside, the yard carried the scent of damp soil from last night's short rain. Jacob had asked if we could work on the fort again this weekend, and I told him yes, I wanted that. The car had become a sort of quiet project for both of us, metal parts, and engine noise standing in for conversations neither of us liked to have out loud. I walked out to the driveway and ran my hand along the hood. Dust clung to my fingers. Some things gather a layer over time and wait for someone patient enough to clear it. Later that day, an email notification pinged from my phone. The address was unfamiliar, but the message was only 2 words. Thank you for mercy. The moment I saw it, I knew who had sent it. The tone was careful, almost weightless, as if she had typed it with 2 fingers and a held breath. I stood by the window for a long minute, letting the message settle before deleting it without reply. Mercy does not need an echo. Some things end more cleanly in silence. Evening came with a pale gold light that stretched across the yard. Emily sat on the porch steps, scrolling through her phone with a loose strand of hair falling across her cheek. She looked up when I walked outside. "Dad, you seem quieter," she said, not in worry, but in observation. I sat beside her, and we watched a pair of robins hop along the grass. I did not answer her. She understood anyway. Children can read the corners of a parent's silence better than most adults read words. Inside the house, there were small tasks I had put off. A stack of mail on the hallway table, a box of old photographs that needed sorting a light bulb in the bedroom that flickered in the evenings. I tackled them one by one. Slow work, steady work. The kind of work that lets the mind move through its own rooms without rushing. I found a picture of Melanie and me from years ago, taken on a beach, somewhere in North Carolina. The wind had pushed her hair across her face, and she was laughing. I let the memory rise and fall without fighting it, then placed the photo in the box and closed the lid gently. Night settled in layers. A neighbor's car rolled into their driveway, headlights sweeping briefly across my living room wall. The house felt larger in the quiet, not empty, just spacious in a way I had not felt for months. I stepped out onto the back porch. The boards gave a soft creak under my weight. Fireflies blinked above the grass, tiny pulses floating in the dark. I leaned on the railing and let the air wash over me. There is a moment after everything breaks when a man expects something grand to follow. A revelation, a release, a rush of clarity. But real life moves slower. Closure is not a door slam. It is a steady shift, like dawn edging in before you notice its light. I felt that shift now, subtle but sure, in the way my breath eased and my shoulders settled. I thought briefly of Melanie. Not in anger, not even in grief. Just as a part of a story that had run its course, she had made her choices and I had made mine. The law had taken its path and I had taken mine. I wished her nothing. That in itself felt like a kind of peace. I went back inside and turned off the hallway lights one by one. The house dimmed, softening into its natural quiet. I paused at the living room window. Outside, the streetlights glowed like small moons. A couple walked their dog past my driveway, speaking in low tones. Life continued with its usual rhythm, unbothered by all the ways mine had shifted. I picked up my keys from the table and held them for a moment. Their cool weight pressed slightly into my palm. A simple object, but it felt like it marked a threshold. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet acknowledgement that the worst was behind me and something steady waited ahead. I set the keys back down. In the bedroom, I opened the window a few inches. The night air slipped in, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and the distant hum of passing cars. I stood there a moment longer, letting it move around me. It felt clean. It felt enough. When I finally lay down, the room held a gentle stillness. No unfinished conversations, no heavy questions. Just the soft pulse of a house settling into its own quiet. And in that quiet, I felt something unclench inside me. Not triumph, not regret. Just a slow unwinding of everything that had been held too tightly for too long. It was small, almost imperceptible, but real. A new door had opened, not loud, not dramatic, just waiting. I let my eyes fall shut, and the last thing I noticed was the thin line of moonlight on the floor, steady and calm, guiding the room into its own soft darkness.